We are once again live.
Sorry. We're now once again live and a little more fan air, which is helpful. Thank you. Jen. Well,
Morning, Jen Harvey, Office of Legislative Counsel. I have brought for you a markup version of S-198 showing what you passed with markup from what the House did to change it. I find it helpful to look at that in context. So it's on your web page. And so again, this is S-198. It's an act relating to the regulation of tobacco products and tobacco substitutes. And this is the version as passed by the Senate, showing the markup from the House proposal of amendment. And some of the changes are just cleanup and some of them are more substantive. So I'll try to distinguish between them. The first was some changes to the tobacco license definition in section 1, the chapter regulating tobacco products. And this ended up making things more confusing than intended. So because we have two different types of licenses now in this chapter, it's not making any changes to the definition of tobacco license. We did not make any changes to the definition of tobacco substitute. There are some non-substantive changes to the definitions of wholesale dealer and wholesale dealer license and wholesale outlet. These are all the same change, and these are just reflecting the fact that where these definitions came from in Title 32 uses some different definitions for the same terms. You'll see if this has a bit of a theme in this bill than what are used in Title 7. So in order to capture the products as defined in Title 7, we're striking out the specifics and just going with the more general tobacco products or tobacco substitutes, because those are defined terms in the same chapter that these definitions are going into. There should be, I'm recommending, and I think with stakeholder agreement, that there be some attention paid over the summer to definitions and trying to get some consistent definitions between the tobacco regulation statutes in Title 7 and the tobacco tax statutes in Title 32. So there's some additional changes in Title 32 that were needed to avoid creating a problem with some of our defined terms here.
and is just to follow up on that, is there agreement between the stakeholders that they'll do that?
I think there is agreement among the, as part of the study and that's coming up later in the bill, I think there is some agreement among the state entities, the
Right.
Department of Tax, Liquor and Lottery, and Attorney
Aligning
General.
Title 7 and 32 is a good idea.
Yes, and I'm volunteering myself to be part of that process. So
Great.
okay. Then we have the license for retail sale, and there's some updates and some clarifying language here. First, in the existing statute on retail licenses, it says that tobacco licenses and tobacco substitute endorsements expire at midnight on April 30th of each year.
Right.
In practice, that's not how it works currently at the Department of Liquor and Lottery, and so they asked to change this to reflect their existing practice, which is that the license is good for a year from the date of issue. It doesn't.
I thought we had done this before, that we cleaned this up, but I guess we have.
I don't think I didn't see
It's been discussed.
Yes.
Right.
And we did it for see coming up for wholesale sales as well. House did some more work in collaboration with the various regulators to also clean up some of the what I keep calling decoupling, but fully separating the tobacco license from the liquor license. So no license issued under this section should be called a liquor license. That all happens in the liquor statutes. You had already taken out the combination liquor tobacco license. So now we're just talking about tobacco licenses and tobacco substitute endorsements. Then a bit more clarity around how the process works for a tobacco license, retail tobacco license to be issued. A person does still apply to the legislative body of the municipality, but they use the application that's provided by the board. So they go through the Department of Liquor and Lottery to apply to the legislative body of the municipality. And cleaning up a bit what the applications are and the fees are. So not changing the fee amounts that you had changed in this committee, in various committees in the Senate, but ultimately ending with a tobacco license, original license or renewal going from $110 $10 to $150, and that was the position of the Senate as well. It could not go into the legislative body of the municipality because that's not how the monies flow currently, although a portion does go there. And they also kept the $50 to $75 for tobacco substitute endorsement. And again, creating some more clarity around how the process between the municipalities, local control commissioners, and the Department of Liquor and Water Division of Liquor Control work. So the municipal clerk forwards the application to the division, and if the municipality's local control commissioners have approved the application, then the division would issue the license and the endorsement as applicable, and fees still go into the liquor control enterprise fund. So there was some interest upstairs in just having the statutes more accurately reflect current practice.
Right.
And so that is help with the Department of Liquor and Lottery, what that does. The rest of that section is unchanged. Wholesale dealers, there were many changes here. The one was the term of the license, again, would be 1 year from date of issue. Under current law, the way the process currently works with the Department of Taxes licensing wholesale dealers, they get the license once and it stays in place. There's no charge for it, and it stays in place as long as the licensee can cost do business in that location. The Senate Senate Finance added a licensing fee. That the House did not change that, but they did specify that this is again an annual license as of the Department of Liquor and Lottery prefers. Probably the biggest change from what you sent is in this section 1005, at least from a tobacco policy standpoint. So as you may recall, and this committee talked a lot about, so we're on page 8 of the document. This is the minors in possession and purchasing tobacco products. And you may recall that as the bill came out of the Senate, there was no prohibition on possession or purchase by minors. There was just the penalty for misrepresenting age using a fake ID. This committee talked a lot about that, and the House has put back in the prohibition on possession, purchase, or attempting to purchase tobacco products, tobacco substitutes, and tobacco paraphernalia with the existing exemptions, but took out the civil penalty. So left in the language that says a minor who is in possession in violation of the prohibition is subject to having those items immediately confiscated, but took out the civil penalty brought like traffic ticket through judicial bureau.
So took out the financial penalties.
Right. So this committee had taken out the penalties and the prohibition. The House put back in the prohibition in large part to keep in this concept of confiscation. So if you didn't have a prohibition on minors in possession, you really couldn't confiscate their stuff.
So, but it also, for people who care about the consequences to these actions, we still have them having to do, they may not have to pay a penalty, but they do have to go to, I believe, a diversion.
Nope, we're not there yet.
Okay, we're not there, but I just wanted to.
For fake ID, just for the fake ID. So minor in possession, there would not be in either the House or Senate version a penalty on a minor in possession or
Of a fake ID.
Of tobacco products,
Right.
tobacco substitutes, or tobacco paraphernalia.
Since this discussion happened in this committee, I have found through my children, it is incredibly easy to get a fake ID.
So an individual who under 21 years of age who misrepresents, and you can see throughout, I've changed person to individual just as we're trying to be a little bit more intentional about when we're talking about humans and when we're talking about what might be a corporation or an entity. So an individual under 21 years of age who misrepresents their age by presenting a false ID would, and then the House took out the financial penalty, which is currently $50, not more than $50. That came out of the Senate was not more than $100. And they replaced that instead with the option. So the person would be offered the choice of providing up to 10 hours of community service, which is a possibility under the system law as well, or participating in a nationally recognized youth tobacco cessation program to be determined by the Department of Health. That action would be brought in the same manner as practice.
Were the ethnicity offered
if there's a good chance that that was just my markup. We've had those who saw this upstairs know I keep having a little trouble in my markup for you to review, but I think the language itself is okay. Yes, I started group P, and I think that was,
Sure.
excess.
Maybe somebody in the room knows this, if Jen, you don't, but do we have a good number of successful community service hour programs around the state? I feel like they are disappearing. I mean, I'm a big supporter of community service programs, but like Burlington lost its program just with budget cuts. I don't know of any community service programs left. I would hope the AG's office knows.
Davis from the Attorney General's office. I am not aware of significant reduction, but the avenue we tend to work in is court related, which is a little different than the Judicial Bureau, meaning pre-charge and post-charge and diversion work, and that's not quite what this is, but I'm happy to follow up with that community of practice because they'll likely have that information.
Yeah. How many programs are out there? Is it available everywhere? Otherwise, we have some inequities between who's able to access community service and who would have that option.
So I just want to make sure we're clear on the change here.
Right, so
The
instead of a
house version
financial penalty, they have an education. They're really trying to affect the behavior.
Right.
Either through community service or an education program.
Right, and I mean for that, I want to make sure you understand the full section generally, which is that they put back the prohibition on possession and purchase by minors, but without the financial penalty.
So
Confiscation is part of it.
So the
confiscation.
lots of that is a financial penalty. Anybody could just pay or a parent could pay and you blow it off. The plus of this is if there's a good community program, it's basically in a good education program, you hopefully are changing the thing.
Well, it's only for the false identification though.
Right.
So minors in possession generally would continue to be prohibited with confiscation of the item, but not a financial penalty for possession only. And then, which there is under current law, that's the civil penalty of $25. And then the use of fake ID to purchase is where the financial penalty has come out and the choice between community service and cessation program.
Right. So that's the consequence. Right. Yes.
Jill Suthoff Garen, for the Coalition for Tobacco Free Kids.
Louder, you have a
Tobacco Free Kids. So just, my daughter is going through high school. They all had community service requirements.
Yeah.
So most guidance counselors have lists of community service opportunities. My daughter just, did National Honor Society. They have an extra community service requirement. So everyone's trying to get kids, just to, when they graduate, have community service hours as well. So I think there are, opportunities, widespread.
Yeah,
There's
they
certainly
are.
that, but I don't think those count necessarily as for diverted community service. Like if you ask your parallel justice or community justice centers, I think I don't know that the court can tell a school to oversee their community service hours.
No, but there's a lot of community service required in DUI court and a bunch of other courts. So there's clearly robust.
No, I
community service
think that
You're talking about the oversight then?
I don't know what we're
We can
talking
check
about.
with the judicial
This is a
bureau.
judicial
and
question,
see- Right,
not a-
because this is part of the existing law, about 10 hours of community, up to 10 hours of community. service. I think we can check with the judicial bureau and get you some
Yeah,
information about
because-
where they are.
Right, I would move all of it more in the direction of community service if we could. I then make sure it's funded.
Right.
Because it becomes, the difference between no offense, Jill, a student who can get 10 hours of service for honor society and a student who might be caught up in this and what their options are if they don't have transportation, et cetera, is really different. So, when municipalities do full ordered community service or nonprofits, there's a process it's sort of not just the parent,
Right.
like making sure it happens.
So if we could check with the Judicial Bureau, somebody,
Do that.
that would be great, because we're hoping that we can concur on this with any, we're sort of at the end of session, and hoping we can understand and appreciate and close this.
Right, ready to move on in the bill. So now we are in section 1007, and this is selling or furnishing tobacco products, tobacco substitutes, tobacco paraphernalia to a minor. And so the House has kept, and so they have specified this is an individual, and they've split out the individual and the individual being the clerk. My understanding how that currently in practice works. And so they put back the cap. So kept your increase for the first offense from $100 to $150, so put back in the cap. That's why it's highlighted but not underlined. And then split out a subdivision 2 to clarify that in addition to the civil penalty imposed against an individual for a violation under subdivision 1, for any subsequent violation, the licensee may be subject to an administrative penalty and license suspension or revocation as set forth in subdivision B2. So it's going to clarify here when it's the individual and when it's the business that is getting penalized. Person individual,
Page 5 is all about the business.
page
10 is all about so,
page 5, page
uh,
page 5 was the
13,
licensure
person who sells tobacco products, practices.
without obtaining a license. So that's the license piece. But if you go back to page 10, so I would say subsection A or subdivision A1 at the top of page 10 is the individual clerk. And then it's in subdivision A2, it's kind of foreshadowing that the penalties for the licensee, the retailer, maybe are coming up later. And that's where we get to on page 11. That says any violation by tobacco licensee, so that's the retailer, of the prohibition on sales to minors, or this section after a sale violation or during a compliance test. And the House took out conducted within 6 months after a previous violation and just said second violation generally is considered a multiple violation. And they've changed the penalties from civil to administrative. So that's all that needs to come. So, so the amounts and the suspensions are all the same as what the Senate, but they changed civil penalties to administrative penalties at the request of regulators.
Okay, let's keep going.
Then we've got page 12, we just got some punctuation changes. We're in the contraband and seizure statute. Section 1010 is internet sales, so that's on page 13. And you may remember there was starting to be some discussion, I think, as Bill was leaving this committee, about whether the prohibition on internet sales should have this prohibition on sales to retailers that was struck on lines 10 and 11, or what was intended there. So it's been cleared up in the House. Except as provided in subdivision 2, nobody can cause tobacco products, tobacco substitutes, tobacco paraphernalia ordered online to be shipped to anyone other than a licensed wholesale dealer in this state. And then subdivision 2 says, except that prohibition doesn't apply to a licensed wholesale dealer. So a Vermont licensed wholesale dealer shipping directly to a Vermont licensed retail dealer in this state. We can still have, retailers can still get their items from Vermont licensed wholesalers. That's even if they're doing that online as a transaction, just making sure that everybody is licensed, and that means the wholesalers are paying the tax. Then on page 14, we have our new report requirement. This requires by January 15th of each year, the Department of Liquor and Lottery and Office of Attorney General each to report to various committees, including this one, on enforcement of Vermont's laws relating to online sales of tobacco products, tobacco substitutes, and tobacco paraphernalia. Department of Liquor and Lottery is supposed to report at least the following for the previous 12-month period. The number of online compliance checks the department conducted, the number of cases relating to online sales activity that the department referred to the Attorney General's office for further action, and the number of reports of unlawful online sales activity the department received from the public and the outcome of those reports. And then the Office of the Attorney General would report for the previous 12-month period the outcome of cases related to online sales activities that were referred by the Department of Liquor and Lottery or any other governmental source. The number of reports of unlawful online sales activity the office received from the public and the outcomes of those reports, and the number and amounts of any monetary penalties imposed and other legal remedies executed by the office related to online sales activity. Then we get to the deceptive tobacco products and tobacco substitutes and prohibition. That's new language that you have worked on in this committee. A few things were added in the House. First, there's prohibition not only on all of the activities mentioned in subsection A, but also on possessing for sale. So not just offering for sale or selling, but possessing for sale as well. And then there's a new subsection B that allows the Attorney General's office, in addition to or in lieu of any other civil or criminal remedy provided by law, if the Attorney General determines someone has violated this section, they can impose the civil penalty in an amount not to exceed $5,000 per violation. And each instance of the prohibited activities constitutes a separate violation. It gives the state the ability to recover the costs of investigation, expert witness fees, cost of the action, and reasonable attorney's fees. And it also puts violations under the Consumer Protection Act. Section 2 is just, you get to become section 1A. Now I've renumbered as section 2. And then section 3 is a new section. It is toward the beginning of the title on Department of Liquor and Lottery's purview in Title 7. And it relates sort of more generally to Department of Liquor and Lottery's authority, in this case, their authority to suspend or revoke a license or permit and impose an administrative penalty. Some of these changes are clarifying or cleanup, referencing that the power to suspend or revoke may belong to the local control commissioners as applicable, or the Board of Liquor and Lottery, depending on who is issuing. Striking language saying a tobacco license may not be suspended or revoked for a first-time violation, because that is not what is included in most of the language in chapter 40 that comes later. Adding in the Board of Liquor and Lottery's ability to impose an administrative penalty of up to $7,500 per violation against the holder of any tobacco license for violation of the conditions of the license or this title or rules, and taking out the separate standalone administrative penalties for tobacco licenses, and putting them with the rest of the entities under the Board of Liquor and Lottery's purview. And then striking language saying for a first violation during a tobacco or alcohol compliance check during a 3-year period, licensee or permittee receives a warning and is required to attend a diversion server training class. My understanding from the testimony of the Department of Liquor and Lottery is that's not how they prefer to approach these issues. They prefer to work extensively on prevention. So they asked to strike. So all of those are requests from the Department of Liquor. No changes to section 4, confidentiality of tax records. Section 5, we're in the tobacco tax statutes now, and the definitions section. We've made some changes here in the definition of other tobacco products to make sure that there is no change to the way the Department of Taxes can tax nicotine pouches, which they have placed under new smokeless tobacco, and are taxing accordingly now. And so as I mentioned, there needs to be some work to kind of untangle these definitions that are not consistent between two titles. But this was a request from Department of Taxes to not mess anything up, as we're more specifically referring now to nicotine pouches and tobacco substitute as a tobacco substitute in the tobacco statutes, but they are classified as new smokeless tobacco in the tax statutes. So it is specifically referring to those in the new smokeless tobacco definition for now, so that taxing can continue as it is until you make changes, and there's some cleanup in the definitions. No changes to section 6, 7, 8, and 9, which is the conforming changes needed to move the wholesaler licensure from Department of Taxes to Department of Liquor and Lottery. Section 10 is new. It's a report on tobacco enforcement capacity. It talks about the General Assembly finding that regulation of tobacco products, tobacco substitutes, and the deceptive devices prohibited in the new section added by this act is a significant public health priority, especially for protecting minors from being targeted or supplied with these products. It directs the Department of Liquor and Lottery by January 2027, and in consultation with the Office of the Attorney General, to report back to committees of jurisdiction, including this committee, regarding the following: the number of compliance tests checks that the department conducted in fiscal years 25 and 26 with respect to tobacco products and tobacco substitutes, whether the department's current enforcement staffing levels are sufficient to meet the compliance targets established in existing law, and to adequately enforce the tobacco statutes as amended by this act, including the prohibition on deceptive devices, restrictions on internet sales, and expanded wholesale licensure requirements, any unmet enforcement needs identified as a result of the expanded scope of regulation under this act, and whether additional staffing resources at Liquor and Lottery or the Attorney General's office or both would materially improve compliance with and enforcement of Vermont's tobacco laws. Finally, we have the taxation report, and as it left the Senate, the Department of Taxes, in collaboration with Liquor and Lottery and the Attorney General's office, in consultation with others, was going to do the work. After some conversations between those stakeholders, they determined that it would be preferable to have the Office of the Attorney General, in collaboration with the other two departments, with the consultation with stakeholders, to do the work. And they are directed now to identify efficient and effective processes for imposing taxes on tobacco products in addition to tobacco substitutes, as amended by this act. And you had sent it based on the concentration of nicotine they contain. That's included, but some more has been added. So including opportunities to base taxation on a product's nicotine concentration, or they've added on the volume of a product's nicotine tank, or both. And evaluate the continued use of tax stamps in this state as evidence of payment of the excise tax on, you just use the broader terminology, tobacco products and tobacco substitutes. Explore the potential to transition to a more modern process, such as QR codes or other digitized systems, and consider the advantages and disadvantages of using alternative approaches for certifying tax compliance. Then, still by January 15, 2027, but now coming from the Office of the Attorney General, they would provide findings and recommendations for, more broadly, the items set forth in subsection A, and added in the House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development to receive that report as well.
Do we still have a representative to the streamlined sales tax agreement?
I don't know that anybody was referring to that, but I can check with the tax folks, unless Senator Tippin looking at that.
It could have been mine.
Okay.
It's to me, this is like, I don't know, it's somewhere between stylistic and semantic, but there's so many new words we're using. And we used to be able to look to our streamlined sales tax.
Well, this isn't a sales tax, it's an excise tax on wholesalers.
Well, I guess the streamlined sales tax folks tended to know, like, if we were talking about soda or junk food or anything, if we were talking about excise taxes, or sales taxes,
Yeah.
what definitions we were using.
Well,
That has not been part of the conversation that I've been having with
With
tax.
ways and means.
No.
this went through ways,
It did go through Ways and Means.
and it wasn't raised, Todd or Jill.
No,
That I think at this point, we need to be looking at this. So, any questions for Jen?
I think we're close to concurrence. I just have a really small little amendment. I just want to ban menthol cigarettes, flavor vapes. Can we just add that?
drafted that in the past, so.
I'd be happy to do that if we have a chance.
This
Yeah,
is something
the
needs
code
to
on.
plan.
Yeah.
So,
And then no changes to the effect.
Jen, and, any questions for Jen before we turn to Jill and Todd? David,
Page 5, paragraph, sort of line 13. These, penalties, can you just give me a brief history, $200, $2,000? I know we talked about it, but, where did the changes come from? Were they out of this committee, the 2,000 before it went into?
That has, yes, I believe those have been in the bills since, I have to look at whether that was since introduction, but,
The highlighting would indicate that.
well, the
Yeah.
highlighting is just what's changed in the,
in the house,
right.
I believe it's been in from the beginning.
I don't think that's, so I'm checking with the right.
I'm pretty sure, I think I'm getting a nod from the advocates.
Yes, it was in this bill,
been in
yes.
from the beginning.
Yep. Yes, and then it's,
Okay.
Justification for the very large loss.
Yeah, I think all the advocates testified about the rise. So with that in mind, Jill, why don't you come, or Tina, whoever wants. Tina, thank you for your letter last night. Jill, do you want to take a stand and let us know how you feel about what the House did? And talk about the rise, which we passed, so, I mean, in fees.
Yes, and Joseph Parent, the Coalition for Tobacco Free Kids and Campaign Team for Tobacco Free Kids. So we appreciate all the work that you've all done, and we appreciate the work that the House did. We understood that there was really a speed point on not wanting to penalize kids, but also send a message that these products are illegal to possess and use and attempt to purchase. So that going back in, we understand that. And the pieces around the wholesale license really make a system where we can track all the products and make sure that they're getting taxed. And so we really are appreciative of the new system that we're going to have. DLL really came to the table and seemed to be very supportive of this system because they'll have more oversight over the wholesalers. And so we feel like really good work was done in consensus fashion. And just going back to your question, the retail and grocers were asked several times about those penalties and did not have any issues with them. So it's really sending a message that you should not be selling underage goods.
Any questions for Jill?
While we have you, I saw reported in the press this Compass Vermont yesterday. I don't know who they are or where they're coming from.
AI-based news source.
Okay, that might explain things because
Things right there.
this is the same coalition that's been talking to us about health impacts of cannabis, et cetera. And it's not
The Coalition for Tobacco Free Kids is just.
I meant you. Like you, the article, while we have you, the article said that the Senate had passed a bill with higher THC concentrate limits. And I didn't know, I wrote back to them and it didn't bounce back saying like, this is actually not true. I didn't know if you had heard, like where that bill is, if you'd heard.
278.
Yeah.
I think you have it next up on your.
It hasn't passed out of, I think it's either in approps or ways and means, and it hasn't yet passed the floor.
Okay.
The article got it wrong.
But they got it way wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody, like,
That needs to be
I
corrected.
would check with Matt
Yeah.
where can, but I checked with, and we don't, Canvas has not yet even made it to the floor.
That's
I
what we need
just-
Journalists to do the work. So AI generate.
yeah, no, it was, I mean, because they had also emailed me about the landlord's bill.
Okay.
So going on. So, oh my God, what time is it? It's 9:11.
Going back to tobacco, we are happy about what passed. And we're hoping that we can satisfy Keisha's questions.
The community service, I know community service, having a son who's the state's attorney, I know community service is robust.
Yes.
Because people are diverted to it all the time, diversion and community service. So I don't think this is an issue. Did we check with your judicial bureau?
I have not reached out, sorry, Todd Davis, AG's office, haven't reached out to Judicial Bureau. I was checking with our diversion folks who are looking at just.
Right.
wrong.
But I think we have, I've heard nothing that says our community service programs are pretty robust, given that the state's attorneys all over the state are diverting, are referring people.
And it
So-
looks like the process would be that nonprofits have to just sign off that you've done your
Yes.
hours.
And I believe people can choose the community service that they would like to contribute to. But there's a whole bunch of opportunities. So any questions for Jill before we go to Todd?
Just a comment, the 10-time increase in that penalty for selling without a license. Right. Anything, so legislation to me is very, incremental and very thoughtful year to year to year. Anything that increases 10 times smacks as a kind of an emotional, exaggerated response. I'm not going to push back on it, but it certainly does like raise a instant flag.
So let's just chat about that quickly because
Yeah.
these are substantially on purpose.
Yes.
But I get it. We talked about it.
Oh, okay.
We dampened down some of it.
Yeah, we
right?
did.
We did. Thank you. Okay.
And they accepted those.
But this one remains, again, a 10-time increase, just smacks of an emotional response, not a, thoughtful year to year. But I'm not going to push back on it. It just does raise a red flag.
I understand what you're saying. I think, from our perspective, we're really trying to create an environment where kids don't have access to these products and are not struggling with it. So we're just really trying to send that message.
Right back.
So about the ban on menthol cigarettes.
Did we touch that?
I mean,
2 years, 3 years?
Another day.
Okay, are we, maybe Todd, would you like to weigh in?
Thank you. Good morning. Todd Davis with the AG's office. I'll be very quick. I think this is a very solid bill. I think it's representative of good collaborative work across the spectrum of stakeholders. And I think the work of this chamber, this committee, and then the complementary work of the House have improved a bunch of elements and areas. Are there more things we would love to see in this legislation? Absolutely. That probably means it came out in the right place. I think it's setting things up for more information to come before this committee, to come before health and welfare, and to come before the similar committees in the House for expanded and increased efforts to mitigate the rise in youth tobacco substitute use. And I think, with that information, the legislature is going to have the opportunity, whether it's to look at flavors in the future, look at enforcement efforts in the future, look at how we tax and enable inspection of tobacco products and tobacco substitutes to support retailers, and the inspection process, how we work on online enforcement. All of those things are teed up in this bill in a positive way. We certainly hope to come back and keep working on it in the future. So mostly thank you. And I think we would appreciate and support concurrence with this current version.
Thomas, you look like you have a
No.
thought. Dave.
So you're all in on section 11, the report.
Yeah.
It's about this. Got
we were in touch with tax. We were advocating, as you know, for stamping these new products so that inspectors could go in and say, those vapes came from a wholesaler, those vapes are legal. And this is an opportunity for us to help work with tax, work with DLL, on how that process would look like forward, whether we move on from 1776 era taxation system to something maybe different.
Okay,
No harm to the tax lobby, sorry.
Right.
Careful in the speech.
thank you. Thomas, you're the reporter of this bill. Any other thoughts you have or concerns?
I'm ready to concur. I just don't know if the committee is or if we have
Okay.
any questions.
Well, I would ask, given it's on the calendar today, and it would be great if we could concur, I would ask, that we do a straw poll on concurrence.
I think it's on notice today, so.
It is, on notice, but often, we get the House proposals of amendment get pulled up, because they're assuming we've had conversations, which we're hopefully gonna have the conversation on both the things that are on the calendar today, which is this bill and 639, the data genetic privacy has come back with a patch that the Commerce Committee felt they caught and wanted to discuss with us because they have a further amendment. Marcotte has a further amendment that they have that they want to chat about. So, straw poll on concurrence. I would support concurring. Thank you, Thomas. So we're 401. If patient wants to weigh in, happy to add that. So if you, Thomas, you want to check with her. Okay, great. She's running a decorum session up on the floor. So, with that, we're going to shift to, the landlord tenant bill the minute Pam gets
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you, Todd. Much appreciated. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jill, Tina. Thank you. Good work. Todd, leave it open if you would. Chris, could I speak with you in a moment? Could I have a, sure. Yeah, let's go off